The woman stumbled into Trinity, Texas on a sweltering afternoon in June 1878, her dress torn and dusty, her face streaked with dried tears, carrying nothing but the weight of betrayal on her shoulders and a small cloth bundle that held everything she owned in this world. Josephine Tucker had been left at a desolate crossroads 3 days prior by the man she had trusted, the man who had promised her marriage and a new life in San Antonio. Instead, Martin Hayes had taken what little money she had saved from her seamstress work back in Louisiana, stolen her horse, and abandoned her in the middle of nowhere with nothing but cruel laughter echoing in her ears as he rode away. She had walked through the brutal Texas heat, rationing the single canteen of water she had managed to keep, sleeping under scraggly mesquite trees, and wondering if she would die out there in that unforgiving landscape. But Josephine Tucker was not the kind of woman who gave up easily. She had survived her mother's death when she was 12, raised her 3 younger siblings until they were old enough to make their own way, and had worked her fingers raw to save enough money for what she thought would be a fresh start. She would not let Martin Hayes be the end of her story. Trinity was a modest town, dusty and sun-baked like every other settlement in this part of Texas. The main street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small church, a boarding house, and a few other establishments that seemed to sag under the weight of the relentless sun. Josephine walked slowly down that street, aware of the curious stares from the townspeople. She knew how she must look, like something the desert had chewed up and spit out. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment when she spotted a water trough outside the livery stable. She made her way to it, setting down her bundle and cupping the water in her hands, drinking deeply, despite knowing it was meant for horses. She was beyond caring about propriety at that moment. "That water is not exactly clean, miss." The voice was deep and calm, with a slight drawl that marked him as a Texan born and bred. Josephine looked up, water dripping from her chin, and found herself staring at a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. He wore typical cowboy attire, denim pants, a worn cotton shirt, a vest, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking green that seemed to hold both strength and kindness in equal measure. "I am beyond caring about clean at this moment," Josephine said, her voice hoarse from days of little water and even less conversation. The cowboy stepped closer, and she could see the concern etched into his features. He had a strong jaw, covered with a few days' worth of stubble, and his face was weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. "You look like you have had a rough time of it," he said, reaching for the canteen at his belt. "Here, this is fresh. I filled it this morning." Josephine hesitated for only a moment before accepting the canteen, drinking more slowly this time, savoring the clean, cool water. When she finally lowered it, she met his gaze again. "Thank you," she said simply. "Yates Emerson," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. "I work at the ranch just outside of town. What brings you to Trinity in such a state, if you do not mind my asking?" Josephine felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she forced it down. She would not break down in front of this stranger, no matter how kind his eyes seemed. "Josephine Tucker, and I suppose you could say I was left behind by someone who was not as honorable as he claimed to be." Yates's jaw tightened, and she saw a flash of anger in those green eyes, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "A man left you out there in the desert?" "3 days ago at a crossroads, about 30 miles south of here," Josephine confirmed, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "He took my money, my horse, and my foolish trust." "That is lower than a snake's belly," Yates said, his voice hard. "You walked 30 miles in this heat?" "I did not have much choice in the matter." Yates looked at her with something that might have been admiration mixed with concern. "You need food, rest, and probably a doctor to look you over. Come on, let me help you to the boarding house." "I do not have money for a boarding house," Josephine admitted, hating how the words tasted in her mouth. She had always paid her own way, always been independent. Let me worry about that, Yates said, bending to pick up her small bundle before she could protest. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better, but you need help right now, and I am offering it. Josephine wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her pride and independence, but her body was betraying her. She could feel herself swaying on her feet, exhaustion and dehydration finally catching up with her now that she had stopped moving. When Yates gently took her elbow to steady her, she did not pull away. The boarding house was run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson, a stout widow in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes took in Josephine's condition in an instant, and her expression softened from suspicion to sympathy. Good Lord, child, you look half dead, Mrs. Patterson said, bustling forward. Yates Emerson, what have you brought me? A woman in need of help, Mrs. Patterson, Yates said firmly. She needs a room, food, and care. I will cover the costs. Mrs. Patterson looked between them, clearly trying to determine what their relationship might be. She your kin? She is someone who needs help, Yates repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Can you help her or not? Of course I can, Mrs. Patterson said, her practical nature taking over. Come along, dear. Let us get you into a room and draw you a bath. You need to wash away all that dust and dirt, and then we will get some food into you. Josephine looked back at Yates as Mrs. Patterson began leading her toward the stairs. Thank you, Mr. Emerson. I will find a way to repay you. Just focus on getting better, Miss Tucker, Yates said, settling his hat back on his head. I will check on you tomorrow, if that is acceptable. Josephine nodded, too tired to form more words, and let herself be led upstairs. The next few hours passed in a blur of hot water, clean clothes that Mrs. Patterson provided, and a meal of beef stew and bread that tasted like the finest cuisine Josephine had ever eaten. She fell asleep almost immediately afterward, her body finally able to rest now that it knew she was safe. She woke the following morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the unfamiliar sensation of clean sheets against her skin. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic fluttered in her chest. Then the memories of the previous day came flooding back, both the nightmare of Martin's betrayal and abandonment and the unexpected kindness of a stranger named Yates Emerson. Josephine sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body. She was sore in places she had not known she could be sore. Her feet were blistered and painful, and her skin was sunburned despite her bonnet. But she was alive. She was safe. And somehow she needed to figure out what came next. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Tucker, are you awake, dear? Mrs. Patterson's voice called through the wood. Yes, come in, Josephine answered, pulling the sheet up to her chest even though she was wearing the borrowed nightgown. Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a tray with breakfast and a bundle of clothing. I brought you some eggs and toast, and I took the liberty of putting together some clothes that should fit you reasonably well. They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Austin. She was about your size. Mrs. Patterson, I cannot possibly accept, Josephine began, but the older woman waved her protest away. Nonsense. Those clothes are just sitting in a trunk, gathering dust, and you need them. Besides, Yates already paid for a week's stay here, and that includes meals and necessities. Josephine felt her cheeks flush. A week? That is too generous. I cannot let him do that. You can and you will, Mrs. Patterson said firmly, setting the tray on the small table by the window. That young man has a good heart, and he would not have done it if he did not want to. Now you eat your breakfast, get yourself dressed, and then we can talk about what you might do next. Trinity is not a big town, but there are opportunities for a woman willing to work. After Mrs. Patterson left, Josephine ate her breakfast slowly, savoring every bite. She had not realized how hungry she truly was until food was in front of her. Once she finished, she examined the clothes Mrs. Patterson had brought. There were two-day dresses, one in a simple blue calico and another in brown cotton, along with a proper corset, chemise, petticoats, and even a pair of serviceable boots that looked to be about her size. Josephine dressed carefully, her blistered feet protesting as she pulled on the boots, but they fit well enough. She braided her dark hair, which fell past her shoulders when loose, and pinned it up in a simple style. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a different woman than the one who had stumbled into town yesterday. She looked human again, presentable, and most importantly, she looked like someone who had not given up. She made her way downstairs, where Mrs. Patterson was sweeping the front parlor. "Well, do not you look 100 times better?" the older woman said with approval. "Those clothes suit you nicely." "Thank you again for your kindness," Josephine said sincerely. "I need to find work as soon as possible. I was a seamstress back in Louisiana, and I am quite skilled with a needle." "Mrs." Patterson's eyes lit up. "Is that so? Well, that is fortunate indeed. Mrs. Chen, who runs the general store, has been looking for someone to help with mending and alterations. Her eyesight is not what it used to be, and there is more work than she can handle on her own. She is married to one of the Chinese workers who helped build the railroads and decided to settle here. Good people, though some in town have not been as welcoming as they should be. I would be grateful for any work," Josephine said. "When could I speak with her?" "No time like the present," Mrs. Patterson said, setting aside her broom. "Let me walk you over there and introduce you properly." As they stepped out onto the street, Josephine was struck again by how small Trinity was compared to the cities she had known back east. But there was something appealing about its simplicity, its straightforward nature. The people here seemed to know each other, and while she had felt their curious stares yesterday, she had not sensed cruelty, only curiosity. The general store was a well-kept building, with a false front that made it appear larger than it was. Inside, it smelled of leather, tobacco, coffee, and 1,000 other scents that mingled together. Behind the counter stood a petite woman who appeared to be in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying black hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her features spoke of her Chinese heritage, though she wore typical American dress. "Good morning, Lily," Mrs. Patterson called out. "I have brought someone I think you should meet." The woman, Lily Chen, smiled warmly at them both. "Good morning, Margaret. And who is this?" "This is Miss Josephine Tucker. She arrived in town yesterday under difficult circumstances, but what matters is that she is a skilled seamstress looking for work. I immediately thought of you." Lily's expression became interested. "Is that so? What experience do you have, Miss Tucker?" Josephine straightened her shoulders, meeting the other woman's gaze directly. "I have been sewing since I was 6 years old, Mrs. Chin. I worked in a dress shop in New Orleans for 5 years, doing everything from simple mending to creating custom gowns for wealthy clients. I can work from patterns or create my own designs, and I am quick and precise with my stitches." "Those are impressive credentials," Lily said thoughtfully. "I have to admit I could use the help. My husband and I run this store together, but the tailoring and mending work has been overwhelming lately. I cannot keep up with the demand while also managing the store inventory and sales. I would be willing to work hard and prove myself to you," Josephine said earnestly. "I need employment, Mrs. Chen, and I promise you would not regret giving me a chance." Lily studied her for a long moment, and Josephine had the sense that this woman understood what it was like to need a second chance, to be judged unfairly. "Very well," Lily finally said. "Let me show you the work area and we can discuss terms." She led Josephine to the back of the store, where a small room had been set up with a sewing table, good lighting from a large window, and baskets overflowing with clothes waiting to be mended. Josephine felt a sense of relief wash over her at the sight. This was something she knew, something she could do. "I can pay you $1 a day to start," Lily said. "If your work is as good as you say, we can discuss an increase after a month. You would work 6 days a week with Sundays off. Does that seem fair?" It was actually more than fair. Josephine knew that many seamstresses made far less, and $1 a day would allow her to pay Mrs. Patterson back for the room and board and start saving again. "That is very generous, Mrs. Chin." "Thank you. Call me Lily, please." the other woman said with a smile. We do not stand much on formality here. When would you like to start? Today, if you will have me, Josephine answered without hesitation. Lily laughed, a light musical sound. I like your eagerness. Very well, let me show you what needs to be done first, and we shall go from there. Josephine spent the rest of that day working steadily through the pile of mending, her fingers falling into the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. It felt good to be doing something productive, to be earning her own way again, rather than relying on charity. Lily checked on her periodically, and Josephine could see the approval in the older woman's eyes as she examined the neat, almost invisible stitches. It was late afternoon when the bell above the store's front door chimed, and Josephine heard a familiar deep voice greeting Lily. Her heart did an unexpected flutter in her chest, and she tried to tell herself it was simply gratitude, nothing more. Is Miss Tucker still here? Yates Emerson was asking. She is in the back, working, Lily replied, and Josephine could hear the smile in her voice. She started today, and I must say her work is excellent. Josephine set down her sewing and stood, smoothing her borrowed dress nervously before walking out to the main store. Yates stood by the counter, his hat in his hands, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw her. Miss Tucker, you look much improved, he said warmly. Thanks to your generosity, Mr. Emerson, Josephine replied. And I am pleased to tell you that I have found employment with Mrs. Chen, so I will be able to begin repaying you for the boarding house. Yates waved a hand dismissively. There is no rush on that. I am just glad to see you are settling in. How are you feeling? Sore and sunburned, but alive, Josephine said honestly. I owe you a debt I am not sure I can fully repay. You did not have to help me. No, I did not have to, Yates agreed, his green eyes holding hers. But I wanted to. It is not right what happened to you. No one should be treated that way. There was something in his voice, a hint of personal pain, that made Josephine wonder if he spoke from experience. But before she could ask, Lily interrupted. Yates, are you here to pick up your order? She asked. Yes, madam, if it is ready, Yates confirmed, though his eyes remained on Josephine for another moment before turning to Lily. While Lily went to gather his supplies, an awkward but not unpleasant silence fell between them. Josephine found herself studying him more carefully in the better light of the store. He was a handsome man, there was no denying that, with strong features and those remarkable green eyes. But more than his physical appearance, there was something solid about him, something dependable that drew her in despite her recent experience with trusting the wrong man. I was wondering, Yates said, breaking the silence, if you might allow me to call on you sometime, perhaps take you to dinner at the boarding house, or for a walk when you are feeling more recovered. Josephine felt her breath catch. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but the more cautious part, the part that Martin Hayes had wounded, held her back. Mr. Emerson, I appreciate your kindness more than I can say, but I should tell you that my judgment regarding men has recently proven to be severely flawed. I am not sure I am ready for any kind of courtship. I understand, Yates said, and there was no hurt or anger in his voice, only patience. And I am not asking you to trust me right away. I am just asking for the chance to know you better, as friends if nothing else. You are new in town, and it can be lonely starting over in a strange place. I would like to help make Trinity feel more like home for you, if you will let me. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep in Josephine's heart. She found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. Friends would be nice, she said softly. And perhaps dinner sometime, when I am not quite so tired from working. Yates's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. That sounds perfect, Miss Tucker. Josephine, she corrected. If we are to be friends, you should call me Josephine. Josephine, he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his voice. And you should call me Yates. Lily returned with a box full of supplies, breaking the moment, and Yates paid for his goods. As he prepared to leave, He turned back to Josephine one more time. I am glad you are here, Josephine. I know the circumstances were terrible, but I cannot help thinking that maybe something good can come from it. After he left, Lily gave Josephine a knowing look. That young man is one of the good ones, she said quietly. I have known him for 3 years, since he came to work at the Morrison Ranch. He works hard, treats everyone with respect, and has never caused trouble. You could do far worse. I am not looking for anything romantic, Josephine protested, though even to her own ears it sounded weak. Lily smiled gently. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we were not looking for. Now, let us close up the store and get you back to the boarding house. You have had a full day and you need rest. Over the following weeks, Josephine fell into a routine that began to feel almost comfortable. She would wake early, have breakfast at the boarding house, and then walk to the general store where she would spend her days sewing. Lily was kind and easy to work with, and her husband Robert, when Josephine met him, was equally welcoming despite the fact that some in town still harbored prejudices against Chinese immigrants. Josephine proved her worth quickly, her skilled fingers flying through the mending and alterations with a speed and precision that impressed even Lily. Word began to spread through Trinity about the quality of her work, and soon women were coming in specifically requesting her services for their more delicate or important sewing needs. True to his word, Yates called on her regularly. At first, these visits were brief and casual, just him stopping by the store to say hello or walking her back to the boarding house in the evening. But gradually, as Josephine's trust began to cautiously rebuild, the visits grew longer and more personal. They would sit on the porch of the boarding house after dinner, talking about everything and nothing. Yates told her about growing up on a small ranch in southern Texas, how his parents had died of fever when he was 19, and how he had spent the years since working various ranches and learning the cowboy trade. He spoke of his love for the land, for the freedom of riding across open country, and for the simple satisfaction of hard work well done. Josephine, in turn, told him about her childhood in Louisiana, about raising her siblings after their mother died, and about the dream she had harbored of building a life of her own. She told him about Martin Hayes, though speaking his name still left a bitter taste in her mouth, and about the shame she felt for having been so thoroughly fooled. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Yates said firmly when she confessed this. He is the one who should be ashamed. He is the one who lied and stole and abandoned someone who trusted him. That speaks to his character, not yours. But I should have seen the signs, Josephine insisted. Looking back, there were moments when things did not quite add up, but I ignored them because I wanted so badly to believe in the future he was promising. Yates reached over and gently took her hand, the first time he had done so. His palm was calloused from years of rope and reins, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. We all want to believe in a better future, Josephine. That does not make you foolish. It makes you human. Josephine looked down at their joined hands, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. She knew she was beginning to develop feelings for this man, feelings that went beyond gratitude or friendship. It terrified her after what she had been through, but it also felt right in a way that her relationship with Martin never had. As July melted into August, Josephine's place in the community solidified. She paid back Yates for the boarding house despite his protests and began saving money again. Mrs. Patterson had become almost like a mother to her, offering advice and support. Lily and Robert Chen had become dear friends, and through them, Josephine saw firsthand the prejudices and challenges that immigrants faced, even those who worked hard and contributed to the community. One evening in mid-August, as Josephine was closing up the sewing room at the store, she heard raised voices from the front. She hurried out to find 3 men confronting Robert Chen, their voices slurred with alcohol and their intentions clearly hostile. You Chinese should go back where you came from, one of them was saying, leaning heavily on the counter. This is an American town. I am an American, Robert said calmly, though Josephine could see the tension in his shoulders. I became a citizen 2 years ago. Paper does not change what you are, another man spat. You are taking jobs and money from real Americans. That is enough, Josephine said, stepping forward before she could think better of it. Mr. Chen is a respected businessman in this town, and you are drunk. You should leave before you do something you will regret. The men turned their attention to her, and Josephine felt a flicker of fear at the meanness in their eyes. And who are you to tell us what to do? I am someone who works here and will not stand by while you harass my employers, Josephine said, keeping her voice steady, despite her racing heart. Before the situation could escalate further, the door swung open and Yates strode in, followed by two other cowboys from the Morrison Ranch. The change in dynamics was immediate. The three drunk men suddenly looked far less confident when faced with Yates's imposing figure and the backup he had brought. I believe the lady asked you to leave, Yates said, his voice dangerously quiet. And I am going to have to insist you do so. Now. There was a tense moment when Josephine thought they might refuse, might try to start a fight, but something in Yates's eyes must have convinced them otherwise. The three men shuffled out, muttering curses and threats that they did not have the courage to act on. After they left, Yates turned to Josephine with concern clear on his face. Are you all right? I am fine, Josephine said, though her hands were shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. They were harassing Robert, and I could not just stand there and let it happen. That was brave, Yates said, but also foolish. Those men were drunk and angry, and you could have been hurt. So I should have just let them continue threatening Robert? Josephine asked, feeling a spark of anger. Would you have done that? No, Yates admitted with a slight smile. No, I would not have, which is why I understand why you did it, even if it scared me when I walked in and saw you facing them down. Robert Chen came over to them, his expression grateful. Thank you both. Unfortunately, this is not the first time something like this has happened, and it likely will not be the last, but I appreciate you standing up for us. You and Lily have been nothing but kind to me since I arrived in Trinity, Josephine said. Of course I would stand up for you. After ensuring that Robert and Lily were truly all right, Yates walked Josephine back to the boarding house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the heat of the day was finally beginning to ease. You continually surprise me, Yates said as they walked. Just when I think I have you figured out, you do something that shows me a new side of you. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Josephine asked. It is a very good thing, Yates assured her. Josephine, I need to tell you something, and I hope it will not scare you away. Josephine felt her heart begin to race. What is it? Yates stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day when you refused to give up despite everything you had been through. You are strong and brave and kind, and you make me want to be a better man. I know you have been hurt, and I know you might not be ready to hear this, but I could not keep it inside any longer. Josephine stared up at him, her mind whirling. Part of her wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But a larger part, the part that had been slowly opening up over these past weeks, wanted to lean into this feeling, to take the risk. I am scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I am terrified of trusting again and being wrong. I know, Yates said gently, and I am not asking you to say anything back right now. I just needed you to know how I feel. I will wait as long as you need me to wait. I am not going anywhere. Looking into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and patience there, Josephine felt something inside her shift and settle. She realized that she had been comparing Yates to Martin, looking for warning signs and red flags, but the truth was they were nothing alike. Martin had been charming but shallow, all surface with no depth. Yates was solid and real, a man whose actions matched his words. I am falling in love with you too, Josephine heard herself say, and the words felt both terrifying and liberating. I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way I never have before. The smile that broke across Yates's face was radiant. He cupped her cheek gently with one hand, and Josephine leaned into his touch. May I kiss you? He asked, and she appreciated that he asked, that he gave her the choice. Yes, she whispered. The kiss was soft and sweet, a gentle exploration rather than a demand. Josephine felt warmth spread through her entire body, and when they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. I have wanted to do that for weeks, Yates admitted, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. I am glad you finally did, Josephine said. From that evening on, their relationship deepened and grew. They were officially courting now, and Yates made his intentions clear to everyone in town. He wanted to marry Josephine, he told anyone who would listen, though he was waiting for the right moment to ask her properly. The people of Trinity, for the most part, approved of the match. They had seen how Yates had helped Josephine when she arrived, had watched her work hard, and build a life for herself, and they respected the genuine affection between the couple. Mrs. Patterson was particularly pleased, declaring that she had known from the start that they were meant for each other. As autumn began to paint the Texas landscape in golds and browns, Yates started talking more seriously about the future. He had been saving his wages for years, he told Josephine, with the dream of eventually buying his own small ranch. He had his eye on a piece of property about 5 miles outside of Trinity. Nothing huge, just enough land to run some cattle and horses and build a life. I want to build that life with you, he said one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything. Will you marry me, Josephine? Will you take a chance on a future with me? Josephine looked at this man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had shown her that trust was not always foolish, that love could be both passionate and stable. She thought about the life they could build together, about the home they could create, and she knew her answer. Yes, she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you. Yates pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, a ring that had belonged to his mother. I know it is not much, he said as he slipped it onto her finger, but I promise I will spend the rest of my life making you happy. It is perfect, Josephine said, and she meant it. The ring fit as if it had been made for her, and she knew that this was right, that this was what love was supposed to feel like. They were married in early October at the small church in Trinity, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Lily Chen helped Josephine make her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown in ivory satin that showed off her skilled needlework. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears for the young woman she had come to love like a daughter. Robert Chen stood up as a witness for Yates, and Lily did the same for Josephine. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Yates kissed her in front of everyone, Josephine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This was so different from what she had imagined with Martin, so much more real and right and true. The town threw them a reception in the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Josephine danced with her new husband, his arms strong and sure around her, and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 4 months. She had arrived in Trinity broken and abandoned, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of pain. Now she was married to a wonderful man, had friends and a community, and had a future stretching before her full of possibility. After the celebration, Yates took her to the small house he had been renting on the edge of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but he had cleaned it thoroughly and filled it with wildflowers in honor of their wedding day. That night, as they lay together as husband and wife for the first time, Josephine finally felt like she had truly come home. The following weeks were a period of adjustment and joy. Josephine continued working at the general store during the day, while Yates worked at the Morrison Ranch. In the evenings, they would come together and talk about their dreams and plans. Yates was working extra hours and saving every penny he could toward buying that ranch he dreamed of, and Josephine was contributing her earnings as well. As winter approached, Josephine realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. At first, she attributed it to stress and change, but as the weeks went on and other symptoms appeared, she began to suspect the truth. She confided in Lily, who confirmed what Josephine had begun to believe. She was with child. The joy she felt was overwhelming, but it was tinged with nervousness. She and Yates had talked about children, of course, but they had thought they would have more time to establish themselves before starting a family. Still, when she told Yates that evening, his reaction dispelled any worries she might have had. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Josephine, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Yates said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I have ever wanted. A family of my own, with the woman I love more than life itself." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Josephine continued working as long as she was able, and Lily and Mrs. Patterson fussed over her constantly. Yates became even more protective, if that was possible, always making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. In February, Yates came home one evening with news that made Josephine cry happy tears. He had managed to save enough, along with what Josephine had contributed, to make an offer on the ranch property he had been watching. The owner had accepted, and they would be moving to their own land in the spring. "It is really ours?" Josephine asked, hardly daring to believe it. "It is really ours," Yates confirmed. 50 acres with a small house that needs some work, a barn, and a creek running through the property. It is everything I hoped for, Josephine. Everything we need to build our future." They moved in April, when Josephine was 6 months along and showing prominently. The house was indeed small and needed repairs, but Yates worked tirelessly to make it comfortable and safe for his growing family. He fixed the roof, replaced broken windows, and even built Josephine a sunny sewing room where she could continue taking alterations and mending work from town. The land was beautiful, with rolling hills and good grazing. Yates bought a small starter herd of cattle and a few horses, building the foundation of what he hoped would become a prosperous ranch. It was hard work, but it was their work, and that made all the difference. In June of 1879, exactly 1 year after Josephine had stumbled into Trinity, she gave birth to their first child. The labor was long and difficult, with Lily and Mrs. Patterson attending her while Yates paced outside, too nervous to sit still. But when the sun rose the following morning and Lily finally called him in to meet his son, all the fear and worry vanished. "A boy," Josephine said tiredly but happily, holding the tiny bundle. "We have a son." Yates sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny face peering out from the blanket. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him William Robert Emerson, William for Yates's father, and Robert for Robert Chen, who had become such a good friend to them both. Little William was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to thrive in the love and attention his parents showered on him. As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew as well. Yates proved to have a good head for business, and their herd increased steadily. Josephine continued her sewing work when she had time, but her primary focus was on their son and making their house into a true home. She sewed curtains for the windows, quilts for the beds, and clothes for their growing family. In the spring of 1881, Josephine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, after her middle name and Mrs. Patterson's first name. Sarah was a beautiful baby with her father's green eyes and her mother's dark hair, and William, now almost 2, was fascinated by his little sister. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle, and broken equipment, but Yates and Josephine faced each challenge together. The love that had brought them together only deepened with time and shared experiences. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned how to work together, and support each other through difficulties. The community of Trinity remained an important part of their lives. They attended church on Sundays when they could, and they made regular trips to town for supplies and to maintain friendships. Robert and Lily Chen became like family, and their children called them Aunt Lily and Uncle Robert. Mrs. Patterson visited often, doting on the children and declaring that she had known all along that Josephine and Yates would build a beautiful life together. As the years passed, Josephine sometimes thought about Martin Hayes and what he had done to her. But the anger and hurt had faded, replaced by something close to gratitude. If he had not abandoned her, she never would have stumbled into Trinity. She never would have met Yates, never would have built this life that she loved so much. In a strange way, Martin's cruelty had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. She shared this thought with Yates one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over their land. William was now 5, and Sarah was 3, both healthy and happy. "I do not think I would go so far as to thank him," Yates said wryly. "But I understand what you mean. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things." "My story started with abandonment," Josephine said softly, leaning her head on her husband's shoulder. "I truly thought it might be the end of everything, but you made sure my story continued. You gave me a reason to keep going, to rebuild, to trust again." "You did that yourself," Yates corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of being there when you did. You are the strongest person I know, Josephine. You took something terrible and turned it into something beautiful." In 1883, they welcomed their third child, another son they named James Thomas. Josephine was now 28 and Yates was 32, and they felt their family was complete. The ranch was thriving, and they had built a solid reputation in the community for hard work and fair dealing. William showed signs of inheriting his father's love of ranching, while Sarah seemed to have inherited her mother's skill with needle and thread. Little James was still too young to show clear preferences, but he was a happy, easygoing baby who seemed content to be carried around by his older siblings. As their children grew, Josephine and Yates made sure to teach them the values that had shaped their own lives: hard work, kindness, respect for others regardless of their background or circumstances, and the importance of community. They wanted their children to understand how fortunate they were and to appreciate the life that had been built for them. They also made sure their children understood their family's story. Josephine told them, in age-appropriate ways, about how she had come to Trinity, about being abandoned, and how their father had helped her. She wanted them to understand that sometimes people face difficult circumstances, but that did not define them. What mattered was how they responded, how they rebuilt, and how they treated others who were struggling. The children listened with wide eyes to the story of how their parents met, and as they got older, they began to understand the deeper meanings. William, in particular, seemed to take to heart the lesson about helping those in need, often bringing home stray animals or befriending children at school who seemed lonely. In 1887, when Josephine was 32, they faced one of their hardest challenges. A severe drought hit the region, and many ranchers lost significant portions of their herds. Yates and Josephine were better prepared than some, having saved money during the good years, but it was still a difficult time. They had to make hard decisions about which cattle to keep and which to sell, and there were nights when they lay awake worrying about the future. But they made it through, leaner but still standing. The experience taught them valuable lessons about preparation and resilience, and it brought them even closer together. When the rains finally came and the grass grew green again, they rebuilt their herd with renewed determination. As the 1880s drew to a close and the new decade began, the American West was changing. The wild frontier was becoming more settled and civilized. Railroads connected even small towns like Trinity to the larger world. Barbed wire began crisscrossing the open range, and the freewheeling days of the cowboy were slowly coming to an end. But on the Emerson ranch, life continued in its own rhythm. William was now 11 and already working alongside his father, learning the skills he would need to one day run the ranch himself. Sarah, at 9, was helping her mother with household tasks and showing remarkable talent at sewing and design. James, at 7, was still finding his way, but showed signs of having his father's way with horses. In 1891, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise at 36, but a welcome one. This pregnancy was harder than the others, perhaps because of her age, but she was attended by a proper doctor now, one who had moved to Trinity as the town grew. In the spring of 1892, she gave birth to twin daughters, Alice and Emma. The twins brought new energy and chaos to the household, but also immense joy. William, Sarah, and James adored their baby sisters, and Yates seemed to walk around in a permanent state of happy bewilderment at having 5 children. Their house was full of noise and laughter and love, everything Josephine had dreamed of during those long, lonely years when she was raising her siblings alone. As the twins grew, Josephine could not help but reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. She was now 40 years old, the mother of 5 healthy children, the wife of a man she loved deeply, and the co-owner of a successful ranch. She had friends and community, respect and security. It was so far from that desperate woman who had stumbled into Trinity 24 years ago that sometimes it felt like a different lifetime. But she remembered, and she made sure her children remembered, because those difficult experiences had shaped her into the person she was. They had taught her resilience and strength, compassion and gratitude. She would not wish what Martin Hayes did to her on anyone, but she also would not change the path her life had taken because it had led her here. Yates, now 46, was still strong and active, though his hair had gone gray at the temples, and lines had formed around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Josephine thought he was more handsome now than he had been as a young man. There was character in his face now, evidence of a life well lived and challenges well met. They still made time for each other, despite the demands of 5 children and a working ranch. They would sit together on the porch in the evenings after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing, just as they had in the early days of their courtship. The passion between them had matured into something deeper and more sustainable, but it had never faded. In 1896, when William was 17, he began seriously courting a young woman from town, the daughter of the schoolteacher. Josephine watched her oldest son navigate the excitement and nervousness of young love, and she saw so much of Yates in him. William was steady and reliable, hardworking and kind, and she knew he would make some woman very happy someday. Sarah, at 15, had begun to talk about perhaps opening her own dress shop someday, though she was in no rush to leave home. She was helping her mother with the twins, who were now energetic 4-year-olds, and learning advanced sewing techniques from both Josephine and Lily Chen, who was now in her 60s but still sharp as a tack. James, at 13, had discovered he had a gift for training horses. He could gentle even the most difficult animals with patience and quiet persistence, and Yates had begun to encourage this talent, seeing it as a potential additional income stream for the ranch. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th approached, the Emerson family prepared to enter a new era. The children were growing up, the ranch was well established, and Josephine and Yates were entering the comfortable middle years of their lives. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, had built something lasting and good, and had raised children who would carry on their values. In June of 1900, on the anniversary of the day they first met, Yates took Josephine on a ride across their property, something they had not done in years with all the demands of children and work. They left the twins with Sarah and rode out to the highest point on their land, where they could see for miles in every direction. 22 years, Yates said, shaking his head in wonder. 22 years since you walked into Trinity and into my life. The best 22 years of my life, Josephine said, leaning against her husband's solid presence. Do you ever think about how different things might have been if Martin Hayes had not abandoned me at that crossroads? Sometimes, Yates admitted, but mostly I just feel grateful that you found your way to me, that I was there that day, that I had the sense to see what a remarkable woman you were, even covered in dust and exhausted. You saved me, Josephine said softly. No, Yates disagreed gently, turning to take both her hands in his. You saved yourself. You walked 30 miles through the desert. You did not give up when you had every reason to. You built a new life from nothing. I just had the privilege of walking alongside you while you did it. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears born of deep emotion and gratitude. We saved each other, she compromised. You showed me that trust was not foolish, that love could be real and lasting. You gave me the family and home I always dreamed of. And you gave me purpose and joy, Yates said. You gave me children to love and a reason to build something lasting. You made my house a home and my life complete. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other and watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Below them, they could see their ranch, their home, the life they had built together. Smoke rose from the chimney where Sarah was probably preparing dinner. The cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. Their horses moved lazily in the corral. It was peaceful and perfect and theirs. My story started with abandonment, Josephine said, echoing words she had spoken years before. But it did not end there. You made sure my story continued, and what a beautiful continuation it has been. Our story, Yates corrected, kissing her softly. It was never just yours or just mine. From the moment we met, it became our story, and it is far from over yet. He was right, of course. Their story continued through the years that followed. They saw William marry his sweetheart and start a family of his own on a portion of the ranch land. They watched Sarah Indeed open a dress shop in Trinity, partnering with Lily Chin, who finally retired from the general store. They saw James build a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the region, with people coming from miles around to buy horses he had trained. The twins, Alice and Emma, grew into young women who were as different as night and day, but equally loved. Alice inherited her father's love of ranching and declared she would never leave, while Emma dreamed of seeing the wider world and eventually moved to San Antonio to attend teachers' college. Lily and Robert Chen both passed away in the early 1900s, but not before seeing the community they had helped build become more accepting and inclusive. Their legacy lived on in the friends they had made and the lives they had touched, including the Emersons. Mrs. Patterson lived to the remarkable age of 87, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1905. She had been like a mother to Josephine, and her death was deeply felt. But she had lived long enough to see Josephine happy and settled, which she often said was one of her greatest joys. As Josephine and Yates entered their 60s, they gradually handed more of the ranch responsibilities to William and James, though Yates never fully retired. He loved the work too much, loved being out on the land with his sons and grandsons. Josephine continued her sewing, though now more for pleasure than necessity, and spent her time doting on her growing brood of grandchildren. They had been blessed with 12 grandchildren by 1915, and the Emerson family gatherings were loud, chaotic, joyful affairs. Josephine would look around at all these people who existed because she had survived that terrible journey across the desert, because she had not given up, because Yates had seen her worth when she felt worthless. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. One evening in the summer of 1920, when Josephine was 65 and Yates was 70, they sat together on the porch of their home, a ritual they had maintained for over 40 years of marriage. The house had been expanded over the years to accommodate their large family, but this porch remained unchanged, the place where they had shared their first kiss, where they had made plans and dreamed dreams, where they had weathered every storm together. "Do you ever have regrets?" Josephine asked, a question she had never asked before in all their years together. Yates looked at her in surprise. "Regrets? About what?" "About this life," Josephine clarified. "Maybe you could have done more, seen more, Been more if you had not taken on a broken woman with nothing to her name. Yates took her hand, his fingers still strong despite his age. Josephine Emerson, you listened to me. Taking a chance on you was the best decision I ever made. This life we built together, these children and grandchildren, this ranch, all of it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You were never broken, not really. You were bent, perhaps, but never broken, and I have never, not for one single moment, regretted choosing you. Josephine felt tears slide down her cheeks, happy tears that seemed to come more easily with age. I love you so much. I have loved you since those early days when I was terrified to love again, and I will love you until my last breath. And beyond that, I hope, Yates said with a smile, because I plan to find you in whatever comes after this life, and I plan to love you through eternity. They sat in comfortable silence, watching another sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant colors. Around them, they could hear the sounds of their life, grandchildren playing, their grown children talking, the lowing of cattle, the chirping of crickets as evening fell. It was the sound of a full, rich life, a life well lived. Josephine thought back to that terrified, desperate woman who had stumbled into Trinity 42 years ago. That woman had thought her story was ending, thought that abandonment and betrayal had written the final chapter. But she had been so wrong. That had not been an ending at all, but a beginning. The beginning of the greatest love story she could have imagined. The beginning of a family and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. Thank you, she whispered to Yates. For what? He asked. For seeing me when I felt invisible, for helping me when I had no right to expect help, for loving me when I did not think I was lovable, for making sure my story continued. Thank you for letting it continue with me, Yates replied, for trusting me with your heart after it had been broken, for building this life with me, for giving me everything I never knew I needed. As the last rays of sunlight faded and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Josephine leaned her head on Yates's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This, she thought, was what happiness truly was. Not the absence of hardship or pain, but the presence of love and purpose and connection. Not a perfect life, but a real one, filled with all the messy, beautiful complexity that came with truly living. Her story had started with abandonment, with cruelty and betrayal and desperation. But it had not ended there. Not even close. The cowboy, Yates Emerson, had made sure her story continued, and in doing so, they had written something far more beautiful than either of them could have created alone. They had written a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild Texas landscape, a story of redemption and second chances, of trust rebuilt and love that endured. And as Josephine sat there with her husband under the vast Texas sky, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey, even the painful ones, had been worth it, because they had led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love. Her story started with abandonment, but it did not end. The cowboy made sure her story continued, and what a glorious continuation it had been.